All right, so you want to talk about sexual size dimorphism,
We do.
which is basically, why in some species the males are bigger, and some species the females are bigger, and some species you can't even tell the difference.
Right. And we're looking at a paper here. It was published in Nature Communications.
Yeah, this is cool research.
Yeah, really cool research. They looked at 124 different mammal species,
Wow.
and which is important, right? Because the larger your sample size,
Sure.
the more robust your findings are going to be.
124, that's a lot. So they're diving deep into the gene pool, right? Trying to figure out what's going on in the DNA that might be driving these differences in size between the sexes.
Exactly.
Okay, so what did they find? What's the connection between SSD and our genes?
Well, they found that it's not just about individual genes, it's about entire families of genes expanding or contracting in concert with SSD.
Whoa, 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 back up a sec. Gene families, like a whole bunch of genes working together.
Right. Imagine a gene family, like a team of workers, right? If a particular job becomes more crucial, in this case, maybe certain traits are super important for attracting mates,
Right.
then the genetic management might duplicate those workers or even bring in closely related specialists to really ramp up production in that area.
Fascinating. So the bigger the size difference between the sexes in a species, the more likely you are to see differences in the size of these gene families.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that it's not simply that larger animals have more pronounced differences. They found that even after controlling for body mass, the link between SSD and these gene families remains.
Okay, so size isn't everything, but it's definitely playing a role here. But what about the specifics? Which gene families are we talking about? Give us the details.
Well, one of the most intriguing findings relates to the sense of smell. They found that gene families associated with olfaction, basically, the ability to smell, tend to expand in species with greater sexual size dimorphism.
So romance really is in the air, literally.
Yeah.
Does that mean that a bigger size difference equals a better sense of smell?
It suggests a strong connection, yeah. Think about it, the role of scent in mate selection for so many creatures. Pheromones, those chemical signals, are crucial for attracting mates in a lot of mammals.
Totally.
This finding seems to indicate that as competition for mates heats up, the pressure is on to develop a keener sense of smell,
Hmm.
which would be reflected in those olfaction-related gene families expanding over generations.
It's like an evolutionary arms race, but with noses instead of, well, arms.
Precisely. But here's where it gets really compelling. On the flip side, they found that gene families involved in brain development actually contract with greater SSD.
Wait, really? So bigger size differences might actually mean less complex brains.
That's what they found.
Okay, we're gonna have to unpack that one. Less complex brains. So like the species is putting more energy into growing huge antlers or something.
Yeah, it's a trade-off, right?
Right.
You know, those exaggerated traits that signal attractiveness to potential mates, they require a significant biological investment. It appears that in some species, there simply may not be enough resources to go around for both extreme sexual size dimorphism and highly developed brains.
So you're saying it's like a budget.
Hmm.
And some species are like, okay, we're going to spend it all on being huge. And some are like brains over brawn. We're going for the intellectual look.
That's a simplified way to put it, but you get the idea.
I like my way better. Are there any species that really illustrate this in the study?
Absolutely. One example the researchers highlighted was the southern elephant seal.
Oh yeah, those things are huge.
The males can be up to 10 times larger than females.
10 times.
A truly striking example of SSD. And they have a relatively simple brain structure compared to other mammals their size, particularly in areas associated with higher cognitive functions.
So the males are all brawn and no brains.
Well, not exactly. This
Yeah.
isn't to say they aren't intelligent in their own right. But it does suggest that the evolutionary pressure to develop enormous size for male-male competition may have come at the expense of greater brain complexity.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've talked about elephant seals, but what about us? Humans. Did they look at our genes at all?
They did, and they found something really interesting. When they looked at human gene expression data, they found that those same gene families that tend to contract with greater SSD in other mammals, well, they're more active in adult human brains.
Wait, hold up. The genes are smaller, but they're more active. That seems kind of backwards.
It does on the surface, yeah. But it suggests that while these gene families may be smaller in size, they are potentially very busy during specific stages of human brain development, particularly later stages.
So even with our relatively modest size differences, these ancient genetic patterns linked to SSD are still playing out in the development of our brains.
It seems that way.
Wow. It makes you realize how deeply rooted these processes are in our evolutionary history. But what does it mean for us? If these genes are so active in adult brains, does that change how our brains are structured?
That's the million-dollar question. This study opens up more avenues of research than it closes. What we need to figure out next is how these changes in gene family size translate into actual differences in brain structure and function.
So it's not just about the size of the gene family, it's about when and where those genes are active during brain development.
Exactly.
What are some of the other big questions that scientists are trying to answer in this area?
Well, one of the most significant questions is how these genetic patterns relate to the actual differences we see between male and female brains. Are there specific brain regions or neural circuits that are more influenced by these gene families? And if so, how do those structural differences translate into behavioral or cognitive differences?
Right, because we're talking about genes here, but
Yeah.
those genes ultimately influence behavior, right?
Absolutely. Another important question is the role of environmental factors. We know that experience can influence gene expression. So, could it be that the social structures that arise from different levels of sexual size dimorphism also play a role in shaping brain development?
So it's not just our genes dictating our destiny. Our experiences matter too.
Precisely. It's a fascinating area for future research. We can't discount the interplay of nature and nurture.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. It really is amazing when you think about it.
It is.
Like all these tiny little genes that are like carrying this history of
Yeah.
our evolution makes you wonder what else is hidden in our DNA, just waiting to be discovered.
That's the beauty of science, right? Every answer just leads to more questions, but that's how we learn.
For sure. And this study, it's like we've opened this door into how bodies and brains have evolved.
Absolutely. And, as we keep exploring, we have to remember evolution isn't always a straight line.
Right, right. So what you're saying is this whole trade-off between brawn and brains,
Hmm.
maybe it's not so clear-cut.
Exactly. Like, take those birds with their elaborate mating rituals, the dancing, the
Oh,
singing.
yeah.
Some researchers believe that takes a lot of brain power.
Yeah. So they're not just big and flashy, they're actually smart.
Could be. And if those are the traits that get them the mates, well,
Then you'd see both. Bigger bodies, A&D, more complex brains evolving together.
it's a possibility. We have to keep our minds open to these different evolutionary paths.
Wow. So much to think about. This has been an incredible deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been my pleasure.
And for you listeners, thanks for coming along on this journey with us. Be sure to check out the show notes for more information. And until next time, keep those brains buzzing.